Hello, this is Amber Rain Davis with NotableInk.com, and I am here today with a set of Zentangle cards for the CutCardstock.com blog, and I'm going to be tangling on basis white cardstock today. I've had the opportunity to try a lot of different cardstocks from CutCardstock.com, and this one is really great to tangle on. It's an 80-pound weight, and it has just a little bit of texture that makes your shading go really well, and it takes the ink really well. So we'll get started. I've just drawn a diagonal line or string with a pencil, and you can see that I've added some half moon shapes to either side, kind of alternating there. And I'm going to start off by drawing some flowers. As far as I know, I'm a certified Zentangle teacher, or CZT, and as far as I know, this isn't an actual Zentangle pattern, this one here. It's a little bit like henna drum if you've done that one, but really what we're doing here is we're creating, illustrating some flowers, I guess we'll say. It is a repeating pattern. You're going to do the same thing over and over, and I'm putting 5 petals on each of these little half moons. So I'm starting with the one in the middle, and then I want the petals to be kind of funky shapes, not anything symmetrical. And as I run into another petal, I'm just going to stop that line as if it's going behind it. So it's kind of like a masking technique or drawing behind. So the next thing that we're going to do is add some weight. So I'm adding some shallow parentheses on either side of the baseline on those flowers and just filling that in with the black pen. The pen that I'm using today is a Sakura Micron PN pen. PN stands for plastic nib, so if you're heavy-handed like I am, you may crush the tips of a traditional Sakura Micron pen. So I find that these PN pens work really well for me. So our next step is going to be to add a folded tip to each one of these petals. So I start off on the side of the petal line, kind of come down with a bump, and then join that line again. So it's kind of like, I don't know, a really broad M shape type thing. Here, this tangle pattern is called Caviar, and you just draw a circle, leave a highlight and fill it in, and then you aura it or draw an outline around that circle. So once I've fit in as many circles as I can, I'll go ahead and fill in the rest of that original shape that we did with just black ink. Again, adding more contrast so that we've got that deep dark center. The next thing that we're going to do is add a pattern called Tipple, T-I-P-P-L-E, and that really is just adding circles to that fold. It darkens up the fold so that it has a different amount of contrast to the petals that we're going to color in with some alcohol markers. So when I was originally going to do this background, I thought that I would leave it in just graphite so that the flowers would really stand out. And then I decided it was too light, so you can barely see it here. And what I did is I just did a regular grid pattern, kind of wavy. And so I decided that I would switch to pen, and so that there would be more contrast and you'd be able to see it better. So I added a regular grid, and then what I did is added a diagonal line through those grids so that I would have triangles versus squares. And now I'm going to just round those corners. So I'm basically tracing over the lines, but going just short of those corners. And this is a pattern called Nzeppel, N-Z-E-P-P-E-L. And after we're done creating these little kind of like Nerf balls that get smushed into these spaces, we're going to fill in the interstices. So the spaces where we've rounded the corners, we're going to fill that in. Sometimes I don't always fill them in with this pattern, but with this particular card, it needed extra contrast down there. So this is how I'm going to add my contrast. I'll fill in the areas in between those kind of like stones or Nerf balls and those in between spaces to add greater contrast. So it kind of like almost starts to look like maybe like a stone pathway, pavers, or something like that. So we're moving on to our coloring, and I am using Altenew artist markers in R318, which is ruby red, R304, which is coral berry, and R302, which is frosty pink. So I I'm showing you the flowers starting at this point because as I was coloring them, I changed the way that I colored them. So the first set I started with, I only used the lightest two colors, and then I decided I needed more contrast. So with these last flowers, I started with the darkest color, the ruby red, flicked that up from the base, then blended it out with the coral berry, and then I added it also, the same thing, the darker and then the second darker underneath the fold of the petal, and then I'll go in with the frosty pink and blend those out. As I'm blending it out, I'm leaving some white space in the center of the flower so that it looks like it's bent, and so that we can have a difference in color value. So I'm not really going for a smooth blended look. I'm trying to keep in my the texture of the flicks in there. So you really could do it either way though. If you want to have more of a blended look, then instead of holding your marker upright, so like I'm pretty much up on my tip here and flicking from the tip, then hold your marker a little more horizontal so that you're using the side of the pen. You'll get a broader stroke and a more even, smooth blend that way. So it's really just personal preference and what you want to do. Since this is kind of like a funky illustration, I thought having the pen strokes in there would be nice. So I created this design without thinking about the sentiment, and then I had to go and try and find a sentiment that would fit in this space. And so I landed on this thank you die from the Altenew flower arrangement die set. And I'm only gonna do 2 layers because I wanted it to feel like a 1-layer card, but I wanted a little extra oomph to it. So I did 2 layers of the black basis cardstock and glued those down. And now I'm going to add some shadow. So I want to separate the flowers from that Nezeppel background that we have there. So I'm just adding, that's just a regular graphite pencil there. You could use any household pencil that you have. And I closed my curtains because I felt it was hard to see the shading here. Now I'm going in and I've added just 1 line of graphite to each one of these little stones here. And I'm just drawing that out with a paper stump and just blending that edge so it's not a harsh edge. And that just adds a nice 3D texture to those little stones there and adds some added interest. Although I did really like it when it was stark white as well. So again, that's personal preference. You can do it either way. I'm going to add, I had some empty spots there, so I went ahead and filled those in with ink. And I'm going to go ahead and add some shadow on the top side of these flowers, again, to separate it from that white background. And I just think, I love how this card turned out. So much so that I did go on to create 2 other cards. So we'll talk about that in the end as well. So again, just drawing out that graphite. So hold your paper stump kind of more horizontal to the paper versus up on the tip, and you'll get a smoother blend that way. And so as I'm looking at it, I'm just deciding to add, that's one of the things, like oftentimes I'll take pictures of my Zentangle projects, and then after I take the pictures, I decide it needs more contrast with the shadows, so I'll go in and deepen the shadows. So, you might look at it a couple times and then rework your shading a little bit as you go. So I'm going to glue those down, and I love how the U just kind of like wraps around that flower petal right there. I think that ended up looking really nice and came out well, considering I did not plan my sentiment ahead of time. So with the next 2 cards that I do, I will actually pick the sentiment first and then plan my card around that sentiment. So I just put that down with a little bit of Ranger Multimedia Matte. Here's the finished card, and in this example, we created that flower like a border tangle, like you would use this as a border, which is exactly what we did. And then we laid down the Nezeppel underneath. I love the large scale of the Nezeppel and how our grid was kind of wavy, so you get a lot of perspective in those little stones that we created there. And so I was so inspired, I created 2 more cards. I didn't film those cards because I took them to the pool. It was spring break, and I took these to the pool to kind of finish them up there. So for this one, instead of doing a half dome shape, I did a full circle and created the flower around it. Now, to make it easier on myself, I did draw a pencil line straight through the middle of that circle, and then I did 5 petals on either side, which I found was easier to just compartmentalize it that way versus trying to figure out the spacing of those petals all the way around. Again, I did that large scale Nezeppel, and this is one where I put my sentiment down and then drew my diagonal line so that I would know that where my sentiment was going to be and how far up I could go with my design. For this next one, I took it a step further and decided to do 4 flowers. So here, one thing that I would do differently than I did is I went ahead and drew my my little dome shapes there, kind of like the ladybug shape. I drew all 4 of those. That was the first thing I drew. Now, if you look at my flowers, you'll see that some of my petals look like they're drawn behind some of those dome shapes or the center of the flower. There's no way that could happen in nature. I'm not trying to be completely realistic here, but what I would recommend is draw one complete flower and then put in your next dome shape and do your next flower so that you don't have petals just ending right into the center of a flower. That doesn't make sense. But I went with it anyway. I wasn't going to start over. I still think it's beautiful, and I don't know that many people would notice unless we pointed it out to them. As far as the Nezeppel goes, I did a smaller scale with this one since my flowers were so large. And I liked, changing that up a little. And for this one, I didn't have as much of a wavy background on the Nezeppel. I kept those grid lines pretty straight. Here's the set of 3 cards together, and I was just so tickled with how these cards came out. I just absolutely love them as a set and individually, and I so hope that you feel inspired to give Zentangle on cards a try. If you want to learn more, I do have an Altenew Academy class, and I'll have a link below, as well as links to all the products that were used in the video today, including the basis cardstock, which I found really great to tangle on. Thank you so much for stopping by. If you liked this video, please hit the like and subscribe button so that YouTube will share it out with other people. It's really hard to reach people on YouTube, I find, and I can't really do it without your help. So I appreciate your help in advance. And again, thank you so much for stopping by. I'll link a couple more videos at the end for more inspiration, and have a fantastic day.